Under a vast, cloudless sky streaked with the faded pinks and deep blues of early morning, the desolate Montana badlands whispered of loss and secrets. In the distance, a faint cry for help was carried on an unforgiving wind, its sound sharp against the endless expanse of sagebrush and stone. At that very moment, Garrett, a weathered cowboy haunted by his rugged past, rode along a winding trail etched into the arid earth. His face, tanned and creased by countless horizons, was set in stoic determination as he pursued an elusive destination rooted in both duty and destiny. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. The sun had barely begun to crest the distant ridges when Garrett's keen eyes spotted a disturbance near a dried-up stream bed. There, amidst the jagged shadows of eroded canyons, he beheld a figure struggling against nature's cruel snare. With each desperate gasp and frantic struggle, a pale hand emerged from a shifting mire of quicksand, thick and treacherous as if the earth itself had decided to swallow the lone wanderer whole. Without a moment's hesitation, Garrett spurred his horse forward. The rhythmic clip-clop of hooves echoed in the silent morning as he neared the perilous spot. The woman, a slender figure with dark, wind-tossed hair and eyes rimmed with fear, fought futilely against sinking feet. Her cry, a sound raw with desperation, drew him near. In that moment, the boundaries of the law and the harsh dictates of the frontier fell away, replaced by an impulse as primal as the land itself, to save a life. "Hold on now," Garrett called out in a gruff yet steady tone as he reached the edge of the quicksand pit. His leather-gloved hand gripped the reins tightly, and he guided his horse to a careful stop beside the trembling woman. The sight stirred long-hidden memories within him, a time when hope, like the morning light, had been precious yet elusive. Kneeling at the brink, Garrett extended a strong, calloused hand toward her. "I'm here," he said softly. "Don't you worry. I won't let you go down." His words, sparse in their delivery, carried the weight of a man who had seen too many souls lost to the relentless wilderness. The woman's eyes, wide and glistening with relief and trepidation, met his. For a heartbeat, they exchanged unspoken stories. A lifetime of lonely flight, the anguish of hidden secrets, and a defiant heart that beat against an unjust world. Despite her guarded posture, a silent plea for rescue shone through her expression. With a trembling nod, she reached out. Every moment seemed suspended in the quiet battle between sinking despair and the cowboy's unwavering presence. Summoning every ounce of strength, Garrett maneuvered his horse closer and extended a long, rough rope. "Take this," he instructed, his voice as steady as the rhythm of distant thunder. "Grab hold, and I'll pull you out." With great effort, the woman wrapped her delicate fingers around the coiled rope. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Garrett began the arduous task of drawing her upwards. The earth moaned beneath them, as if protesting the violation of its natural order. The afternoon sun had not yet fully blessed the horizon, and the blood-red dust stirred by their struggle swirled around in silent witness. Time itself seemed to stretch, a harrowing pause between despair and deliverance. When at last her feet cleared the deadly grasp of quicksand, the woman collapsed on solid ground. Garrett remained at her side, his eyes shadowed with empathy and questions that would never find easy answers. He helped her sit up, careful not to startle her further. The quiet of the badlands was now filled with a delicate stillness, punctuated only by the soft, uneven breathing of two souls drawn together by fate. "Thank you," she murmured, voice husky from both fear and relief. Her tone held not only gratitude but a hint of sadness, a secret pain layered upon her weary existence. I thought I was done for." Garrett's gaze softened as he studied her face, lit by the early light and a sheen of dust that clung to her like memories. "The land can be cruel," he replied simply, "but it sometimes offers second chances too." His words, though few, resonated deeply in the vast emptiness that surrounded them. For a brief, fragile moment, the only sounds were those of nature, The whispering wind through sagebrush, the distant call of a lone hawk, and the soft, steady thump of his horse's hooves resting nearby. Yet beneath those natural rhythms lay an undercurrent of tension, a reminder that in this treacherous frontier, every act of kindness might swiftly attract the attention of a world less forgiving. The woman's eyes darted to the horizon, as if expecting a threat to materialize out of the unruly dust storms. Garrett could sense that she was more than a mere victim of circumstance. There was something deliberate in the way she had braved the harsh landscapes, a secret perhaps woven into the very fabric of her being. He questioned her gently. "What brings you out here, miss?" Not many would dare wander these lands, especially not alone. Her eyes flickered at his query, and she hesitated, as though weighing whether to reveal what little she knew of her past. "I'm no ordinary traveler," she finally admitted in a voice barely above a whisper. "I've been running for something I believe is not of my own doing. I have enemies who would see me punished for standing up against what is wrong." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was clear that her flight from the law was not born of simple misfortune, but of a deeper, more principled defiance. Garrett frowned, his rugged features hardening as he considered her words. Life on the frontier was ruthless, and lawlessness often meant more than a mere disregard for rules. It was a way of survival. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the laws of men are more brutal than the forces of nature. I reckon we all have our reasons for straying from the path." His tone, although sparse, encapsulated the blend of compassion and pragmatism that had long defined his journey through these wild lands. Before more could be exchanged, a stirring in the distance snapped their attention back to the present. The sound of hooves, rhythmic and unyielding, grew steadily louder. Dust began to billow from the distant trail, a reminder that the unforgiving wilderness did not allow escapes to go unnoticed for long. The woman's eyes widened in alarm as she clutched the rope tighter, and Garrett instinctively scanned the horizon. "Trouble's coming," he murmured, voice low. The distant riders were unmistakable. Figures that could well be bounty hunters or local lawmen, driven by the same ruthless currents that governed these lands. Danger was never far from those who chose to defy society's cruel edicts. For a tense, suspended moment, the two stood together amid the stirring badlands, their fates now inextricably intertwined. The distant clamor of hoofbeats marked the approach of an unknown reckoning, one that threatened to shatter the fragile sanctuary they had so desperately found. In the dust-filled glare of the dawning day, as the silhouettes of approaching riders grew more defined, a silent, understanding passed between them. Both knew that the road ahead would test their resolve, push them beyond what they had ever known, and perhaps force them to make choices that could not be undone. Garrett's eyes never left the horizon as he adjusted his grip on the reins. "We've got to make a decision. Stand and face them, or make a run for somewhere they won't find us," he said, his words measured and resolute. His voice was laced with the hardened pragmatism of a man who had witnessed too much to be caught unprepared. Yet, amid his guarded tone, there lay a spark of something gentler, a willingness to protect, to shield his fragile soul from the harshness of a world governed by ruthless law. The woman's gaze flickered from the approaching riders to the cowboy who had so unexpectedly rescued her, and then deep into the unyielding terrain ahead. "I do not wish for more bloodshed," she confessed, her voice trembling with an inner turmoil of fear and hope. "But if they come, if they seek me out for what I stand for, then I must find a way to keep true to who I am, even if it means defying the very law that claims to keep us safe." Her confession, softly uttered against the backdrop of an awakening wilderness, resonated with a quiet defiance that both unsettled and inspired. As the distant riders loomed ever closer, their outlines blurred by the swirling dust, the two fugitives locked eyes. In that charged moment, it was clear that their fates were now bound together in a pact forged by necessity and kindled by a burgeoning, fragile trust. The treacherous quicksand of the badlands had not been their final hazard. Rather, it was only the beginning of a journey that would lead them into the unknown heart of a world where love and redemption warred with the unforgiving laws of men. With the clamor of the riders growing louder and the morning light flashing against the rising dust, Garrett made his decision. "We ride," He declared softly, determination hardening his tone. "Follow me and hold tight. We won't let them tear us apart." His words were sparse yet brimming with promise, a promise that their shared destiny will be met, no matter the cost. And so, with hearts pounding against the relentless hush of the frontier, they raced toward a trail carved by hope and danger alike. The echo of hooves, the whisper of wind through desolate canyons, and the quiet murmur of two souls united against a hostile world marked the beginning of their journey, a journey into the uncertain, where every turn held a potential for both heartbreak and redemption. As the riders drew nearer, their silhouettes merging with the swirling dust and the rising sun, destiny beckoned with an ominous whisper. What lay ahead on this rugged path, carved through the harsh wilds of the late 1870s, would soon test the limits of trust, love, and the courage to defy a law that had long forsaken the downtrodden. And in that moment, as the vast Montana badlands bore silent witness to their flight, their future hung precariously on the edge of fate, waiting to be written in the dust and stars alike. The clamor of hoofbeats faded into a distant roar as Garrett spurred his trusted mare into a narrow side trail winding between eroded canyons and scrubby sagebrush. The riders from the dust, a posse of bounty hunters dispatched by a corrupt local sheriff, had been too close for comfort, with the echo of their pursuit still reverberating over the barren Montana badlands. Garrett guided his horse toward a hidden chasm, a secret nook known only to him by the scars of its jagged walls. In that precarious refuge, he hoped to stall their pursuit long enough to regroup. Beside him, the rescued woman, now revealed as Clara, clutched the coiled rope that had once secured her salvation. Her eyes, still damp with residual fear and guarded hope, searched the horizon. The early morning light lent a surreal glow to the sandstone, and every shifting shadow whispered of danger. "They'll be on our trail any minute," she said in a low tone, barely audible over the soft whistling of the wind. Garrett nodded, his features etched with years of loss and hard-won survival. "Aye, and they won't take kindly to helping a fugitive." His words, terse and honest, seemed to embody the unspoken curse that followed them both. He had long learned to keep his distance from those who could upset the fragile balance of his solitary existence, but something in Clara's determined gaze diffused his habitual wariness. The two settled into seclusion of a narrow canyon alcove, its walls towering overhead with muted hues of burnt sienna and umber. Garrett dismounted, fastening his saddle securely as he lit a small campfire from a carefully stoked bundle of dried juniper twigs. Its modest flicker cast elongated, dancing shadows upon the rock faces. For a long moment, the only sound was the sibilant murmur of the creek that snaked through the canyon floor, its waters cooling the otherwise sweltering air. "Why are you on the run?" Garrett finally asked, his voice a gravelly murmur as he handed Clara a canteen of water. Though his questions were few, each one carried genuine curiosity born of his own long-guarded wounds. "Ain't many have the courage to defy the rules in these parts." Clara took a trembling sip and fixed her eyes on the dancing embers. I've seen what happens when you stand for mercy," she began cautiously, her words measured and deliberate. "My people, the ones who've no home or voice, are trampled by those who call themselves the law. I couldn't stand silent when corruption and cruelty reigned. I stole what I had to, gave what little comfort I could. They branded me an outlaw for the sake of protecting the damned." Her admission resonated with the bittersweet cadence of regret and fierce commitment. Garrett's gaze softened as memories evoked by Clara's confession stirred quiet pain in his own heart. "I lost my kin to a similar injustice," he murmured, eyes far off into the distance where the horizon bled gold and blue. "A fire took my family when I was young, set by men who thought themselves righteous while burying the truth." His words, sparse and heavy with shared sorrow, drew a mutual understanding between them in that rugged expanse. Where the law was as merciless as nature itself, their causes had intertwined like the roots of an ancient cottonwood. As the day wore on, clouds began to gather with a portentous slowness. A cool wind stirred the dust into fleeting spirals, and the distant sound of galloping horses, now receding, seemed to merge with the murmurs of the land. Yet despite their temporary isolation, an unsettling tension clung to the canyon walls. Every creak and groan of the shifting earth became a potential warning sign to those who had learned never to trust a moment's calm on the frontier. Garrett and Clara sat side by side, sharing a battered tin of stew heated over the small campfire. The camp's fragile circle was illuminated by both firelight and the creeping shadow of dusk. In the quiet, the unspoken questions of what lay ahead pressed upon them as surely as the cool night. Clara's hand, still stained with remnants of the quicksand's grasp, trembled slightly as she traced a finger over the worn leather of Garrett's revolver, a silent acknowledgement of the danger that now trailed them like a vengeful ghost. "You're not like the others," Garrett said softly. "You got fire in you, a righteous sort that can't be quenched by unjust man." His words, though rough around the edges, carried a tenderness that softened even his own hardened exterior. Clara's eyes flashed with a fragile glimmer of gratitude, and for a brief moment, the bitter isolation of the Badlands transformed into a quiet promise of alliance. But trust, once tentative as the first light of dawn, was soon marred by a new complication. As night deepened and the stars emerged like pinpoints of hope amidst endless darkness, Clara's keen eyes spotted something amiss along the canyon's narrow mouth. There, where the shadows mingled with the faint luminescence of twilight, a set of fresh hoofprints marred the otherwise undisturbed path. Garrett's hands tightened around the worn leash as he rose to his feet, the embers of a small fire reflecting in his determined eyes. "We ain't alone," he said, a terse warning carried on the evening breeze. His voice betrayed little fear, yet every muscle in his weather-beaten frame stood ready for action. Clara's heart pounded as memories of her narrow escape in the quicksand surged back to her mind. The realization that the bounty hunters might have circled back for her ignited a fresh spike of panic. "We need to move," she whispered urgently, voice quiver with the weight of desperation and duty. "They could be rounding us up any minute. They won't stop until they have me in chains or my head on a pike." Garrett regarded her with a steely gaze, weighing the stakes in the dwindling light. The canyon, once a sanctuary of rough solace, now morphed into a labyrinth of potential traps and ambushes. "There's a narrow trail leading to the highlands, a place known as Widow's Ridge," he explained. "It's rocky, but it's off the main path. We can lose them there if we're swift." Without another word, the two gathered what little supplies they could carry and set off into the deepening dusk along the treacherous trail. The rugged terrain offered little comfort. Crumbling ledges, sparse but stubborn vegetation, and the ever-present whisper wind through eroded outcrops. As they rode, Clara clutched a small bundle, a keepsake from a life once hidden, a simple carved token representing her defiance and hope for justice. It was a silent pledge to her people, and it seemed to pulse with the same urgency as the beating of her heart. The journey was fraught with uneasy silences and brief exchanges of guarded words. At a rare pause beneath a gnarled cottonwood, Garrett confided, "I've seen too many souls lost a world that's quick to condemn any sign of compassion." His voice, rough and laced with regret, carried the weight of scars both seen and unseen. "I've been running from my own misery for too long." In that confession lay the seed of shared understanding between two souls who'd each borne the cruelty of an unforgiving world. Clara, her gaze fixed on the horizon with a last trace of daylight surrendered to the night, replied, "I once believed that to help others was to invite ruin upon myself, but I can't turn away. Not when the innocent are left to rot under the heel of corruption." Her words mingled with the cold air, a gentle yet piercing challenge to the oppressive laws of the land. As they crested a steep outcrop, the landscape unfurled before them in a breathtaking tableau of moonlit ridges and shadowed valleys. For a brief respite, the Montana Badlands revealed its stark beauty, a momentary lull in a relentless pursuit, before fate would force their closeness once more. Yet even in that fragile interlude, the unmistakable signs of pursuit persisted. A subtle scuff of hooves on gravel, a distant cry that carried the promise of retribution. Just as they began to believe in the possibility of a temporary safe haven, a low, rhythmic pounding echoed from behind. growing steadily louder with each passing moment. Garrett's heart tightened, and he exchanged a look of grim determination with Clara. With every instinct honed by years on these perilous trails, he knew their respite was nearly at an end. They descended into a shallow valley bordered by ancient, whispering pines where meandering creek offered natural lull. It was here that Garrett signaled for them to dismount. Huddled beneath the dense foliage beside the gentle murmur of water, they waited in breathless silence as the pounding grew ever nearer. The shadows seemed to shift ominously in the flicker of a hastily lit lantern that a passing drifter might have used, and the sound of distant voices, gruff and unmistakably hostile, warned them that danger had not yet passed. In that charged moment, as the cool night air mingled with the anxiety of imminent capture, a single, deliberate hoofprint appeared at the edge of their hidden refuge. It was fresh, unmistakable, a dire sign that the pursuers were drawing dangerously close. In the oppressive quiet of the Montana night, the fate of two wandering souls now hung delicately in the balance, waiting for the next strike of destiny. Garrett's eyes met Clara's, both reflecting the fear of betrayal and the determination to fight on. As the distant sound of pursuit swelled into a foreboding clamor, the valley trembled with the promise of a confrontation that would test the strength of their newfound bond and the very limits of their resolve. What would greet them beyond the thicket of trees? A relentless posse, or perhaps the treachery of a would-be ally whose loyalty remained uncertain. In that heartbeat of uncertainty, with the hooves echoing ever nearer and the moon casting pale, accusing light across the rugged landscape, their escape teetered on the brink of collapse. And then from the darkness beyond the tree line, a sudden flash of movement, a muted whisper of cloth against stone, suggested that their precarious sanctuary might soon be shattered. The valley held its breath, and so too did they, as the next moment threatened to redefine the fate of both Garrett and Clara in the merciless wild of the Montana badlands. Under a midnight sky strewn with stars like scattered embers, the hush of the Montana badlands was shattered by a subtle, deliberate rustle. The distant echo from Part 2 had not been a figment of anxious imagination. The fresh hoofprints and that fleeting flash of movement had foretold the arrival of another presence. In the narrow seclusion of the pine-shadowed valley, where Garrett and Clara had taken refuge beneath a tangle of gnarled cottonwoods, a lone figure stepped into the dappled moonlight. The newcomer appeared at first like a specter, his silhouette leaning against an ancient rock outcrop. He was a drifter by the look of him. His threadbare duster hung loosely over a worn vest, and his eyes, sharp and gauging the faint light, held both wariness and a glimmer of something unspoken. Slowly, he approached along the edge of the camp's meager shelter, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots punctuating the silence like a measured heartbeat. Garrett's hand instinctively moved toward the holster at his side as he peered into the gloom. "Who's there?" he called, his voice low yet laced with caution honed from years riding these ruthless lands. The drifter paused, then tilted his head in a gesture that mingled resignation with an odd tenderness. "Name's Wyatt," he said quietly, not rising to his full height, but keeping his tone measured, a blend of apology and insistence. "I saw your campfire light from a distance and figured you'd be better off knowing someone's been watching the trail." His words flowed like quiet admission, carrying a hint that his presence was not wholly hostile. Clara, still tense from the recent threat, eyed Wyatt warily, yet behind her guarded gaze, a spark of curiosity emerged. "Watching the trail? You mean you're tracking us?" she asked, voice trembling slightly as she tried to gauge his intent. Wyatt shook his head. "Not tracking, miss. I'm scouting. I know these parts well enough that I can tell when trouble's near. Those hoofprints I spotted, they weren't random. I've seen a posse like that before, hungry for a price on your head." His eyes flickered with a mix of regret and resolve, and for a moment, the delicate line between friend and foe wavered in the cool night. Garrett's suspicion remained, yet his instincts, tempered by the fierce loyalty born from loss, drew him to consider Wyatt's words. "And what's your stake in this?" he asked shortly. The cowboy's tone was as rough-edged as it rained, every word laced with caution born of too many betrayals. Wyatt stepped closer, his face illuminated by the smoldering embers of the dying campfire. Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in these parts to know that sometimes helping out doesn't mean crossing a line. It means righting a wrong. His sentence trailed off, leaving a bitter sweetness in the air reminiscent of hard-won redemption. Then, almost in a whisper, he added, I also know that the law doesn't care for those who live by their own code. For a long, breath-held moment, the three stood amid the whispering pines. The tranquil murmur of a nearby creek underscored an atmosphere thick with uncertainty, as if nature itself waited to see who would claim the next chapter in this tale of defiance and fragile hope. Garrett broke the silence. We're not in a position to make friends lightly, he said, his eyes never leaving Wyatt's face. But if you're telling the truth, if you can lead us away from that posse, then you may be of use. Clara, whose heart had pounded with fear and adrenaline since their narrow escape, found herself softened by the sincerity in Wyatt's weathered gaze. I don't want more danger, she admitted quietly, but I can't risk getting caught. I have a cause worth fighting for, even if it means defying those who claim to uphold the law. Her voice, strong yet laced with sorrow, betrayed the enormity of the burden she shouldered. Wyatt nodded slowly. This land is harsh, and the wrongs committed here run deeper than the canyons. I can help you slip through the back roads. His tone was steady, and in that single phrase there lay a suggestion that Clara's defiance was part of a much larger injustice, a truth that resonated with Garrett's own scars. The drifter led them out of the valley, his steps silent on the dusty trail. The moon cast long shadows over the sagebrush plains, and the air was crisp with the promise of early dawn. They rode for several hours along a hidden path carved between wind-carved ridges, where the darkness was punctuated only by the glimmer of distant campfires belonging to those who might be allied with their enemies. The sense of looming pursuit weighed on each rider, as if the land itself pressed in on their escape. During a rare pause beside a gurgling creek that cut a silver path through the badlands, the companions shared a quiet moment of vulnerability. Garrett, his weathered features softened by the gentle reflection of the water, recounted bits of his past, a family lost in a senseless blaze of retribution, memories that had left him with an unyielding determination to protect those who dared stand against tyranny. His voice was raw, every word a measured tribute to lives once cherished and irrevocably gone. Clara listened intently, her own resolve hardening. I grew up on the wrong side of the law, she confessed, her tone resonating with both defiance and regret. I've always fought for those too weak to fight for themselves. The corrupt officials and heartless landowners see people like us as nuisances to be eradicated, but I refuse to let fear silence me. Her words rippled in the cool night air, intertwining with the murmurs of creek and the rustling of nearby aspens. Wyatt, leaning against a mossy rock, regarded the pair with quiet sympathy. There's more to what you're resisting than just greed, he said softly. I've seen how it spreads like a disease, leaving communities shattered and hope trampled beneath heavy boots. His statement hung in the air as the trio contemplated the daunting truth that the corruption in the land was more than isolated acts of cruelty. It was an institutional rot that pierced the heart of society. Yet even as the desert night deepened around them, an unease began to creep in from the far end of the trail. The wind carried with it a faint but insistent sound, a rhythmic clattering that did not belong to nature's lullaby. As Wyatt tensed and Garrett's eyes narrowed, Clara felt an involuntary shiver trace down her spine. Something was amiss. Did you hear that? Garrett asked, his voice a husky murmur as he scanned the darkened tree line. The sound, like the creeping approach of unseen riders, set every nerve on edge despite the relative stillness that had briefly settled over the broken trail. Wyatt shifted his gaze toward the disturbance. It might be one of them, one of the bounty hunters tracking our scent, he whispered. Or worse. His eyes, dark and reflecting the moonlight, narrowed in suspicion. Before any more words could be exchanged, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, snuffing out a small cluster of embers by the creek. In that fleeting darkness, a shape moved swiftly near the tree line, a shadow flitting between the trunks of pines. The sound was almost imperceptible, yet it sent a jolt of terror racing through Clara's heart. Garrett reacted immediately, motioning for both Clara and Wyatt to crouch behind a low outcrop of rock. Their pulse quickened as they listened intently for any further sign of approaching danger. The tension in the air was palpable, like the tight draw of a bowstring before the arrow is released. Seconds stretched into seemingly endless moments as the rustling sound receded, replaced by the soft, eerie murmur of the creek and the low, mournful cry of a distant hawk. But even as the immediate threat appeared to ebb, an unsettling question lingered. Was this merely an isolated scout, or had their pursuers grown bolder in the twilight? Wyatt finally broke the silence in a hushed tone. "I'll take a quick look," he offered, cautiously rising to his feet as he peered into the darkness beyond their cover. His eyes flickered with a resolve that betrayed the inner conflict of risking exposure for the sake of forewarned safety. "Be careful," Garrett muttered, his hand hovering near his revolver. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she clutched the small keepsake, a carved token that had accompanied her through many dark hours, as it were only talisman against a cruel destiny. Wyatt moved stealthily toward the treeline, each step measured on the sandy ground. The trio collectively held their breath, the silence vibrating with tension. After what seemed like an eternity, Wyatt returned, his face etched with concern and an unsaid message. "They're not here in force," he whispered, though his voice trembled slightly. "But I did see a lone rider lingering near the ridge. Someone scouting our trail, and they aren't friendly." As darkness deepened and the moon climbed higher in the cloudless sky, the stakes of their flight grew ever higher. The hidden trail that had offered a temporary haven now seemed riddled with danger, and the present alone, intent rider, was a stark reminder that danger was ever present in the unforgiving wild of the Montana badlands. With a heavy heart and a steely resolve, Garrett signaled that they must keep moving. "We ride at first light," he declared in a hushed tone, "when the ridge may offer better cover. For now, we hunker down and rest. But we must be ready." Clara, though her eyes shone with fear, nodded in agreement. The weight of her own cause, the desperate hope of aiding the marginalized and defying corrupt order, pulsed within her like a quiet drum, urging her to press through the looming darkness. As they settled into a makeshift camp against a rocky slope, Wyatt kept a silent vigil, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of betrayal or renewed pursuit. The creek's soft murmur provided a fragile lullaby, and moments of quiet confessions drifted through the night as Garrett and Clara spoke in hushed tones about their hopes, regrets, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Yet as sleep teased the edges of their consciousness, a sudden, nearly imperceptible sound, a metallic clink echoing faintly in the still air, sent shockwaves through the camp. Clara's hand flew to her chest, and Garrett's eyes snapped open, the sound underscoring a new layer of imminent peril. Before any of them could react further, the distant clamor of rattling gear and murmured voices began to stir the darkness. It was clear now that the threat was nearer than they had hoped, and more organized than a lone scout. A new chapter of treachery was about to unfold beneath the unyielding Montana sky, a chapter that would test the strength of their fragile bond and the resolve to defy a law that had turned the land into a wasteland of injustice. And in that heart-stopping moment, as the fire's dying glow fought the encroaching dark, the question loomed large in every mind. It was closing in, and what secret would be revealed that might alter the course of their daring escape forever? Under a sliver of pale moonlight that carved long, wavering shadows over the wind-scoured ridges, Garrett, Clara, and Wyatt pressed onward along a narrow trail bordering a crumbling rock outcrop. The echo of the metallic clink from the previous night still lingered like an unspoken threat, one that had grown louder in the quiet moments since they took shelter behind a derelict stone shack nestled in a pine-shadowed valley. Now, with the weight of imminent danger pressing upon them, every sound seemed amplified: the soft rasp of dry leaves, the distant murmur of a shifting creek, and the steady cadence of their own measured steps. Just as they reached the edge of the valley, Wyatt abruptly halted and signaled for silence. With a keen eye scanning the moonlit expanse, he whispered, "They're close, too close." I caught the sound of more than one rider along the ridge. Their gear, it clinks like broken chains in the cold. His voice was low, carrying both warning and regret, as if the sound had awakened memories of betrayals in a life long spent on the fringes of honor. Garrett's hand instinctively settled on the worn grip of his revolver tucked in his holster, and Clara's heart pounded a staccato beat against her chest. The uneasy hush that followed was palpable, as though the land itself held its breath in anticipation. Slowly, they inched toward a narrow crevice beneath the overhanging rocks, a natural hiding place where the encroaching darkness could shield them from prying eyes. Within the cramped refuge, the air was cool and musty with the scent of damp stone and pine needles. Flickering campfire embers from their earlier light clung stubbornly to the ground, illuminating their huddled forms in a dance of uncertain amber. It was here that Garrett retrieved from his battered saddlebag a small, intricately engraved knife, a family heirloom passed down from a man lost to the cruel fires of injustice. Its handle was weathered and smooth, and the blade bore carvings that seemed to glow softly in the moonlight, hints of a forgotten promise. Clara's gaze fell to the knife as if it were a talisman of fate. "That knife," she murmured, almost reverently, "is a symbol of all that you've endured. It speaks of loss, but also the strength to rise above it." Her voice trembled between sorrow and a burgeoning hope, one that dared to challenge the relentless hand of corruption. In that quiet moment, amidst the oppressive silence of the rocky hideaway, their bond deepened further, a silent pact to protect not only themselves but the fragile ideals they represented. Wyatt shifted uneasily beside them, his eyes glancing repeatedly toward the narrow opening overhead. "I'm not sure how much longer we can stay hidden," he admitted, his tone laced with both caution and a hint of regret. "I have my reasons for keeping close to these trails, but this isn't just about evading a posse. It's about the message your cause sends out, Clara. And if word spreads, more trouble will follow." His words, though measured, carried the weight of a man who had witnessed the harsh consequences of defiance in the unforgiving wild. Garrett's jaw tightened as he gripped the knife for a moment before letting it rest again on his lap. "We've come too far to turn back now," he said evenly, though his eyes betrayed a storm of conflicting emotions. "Every step we take is a stand against the injustice that's bled this land dry for too long." His voice, rugged and sincere, resonated with the inner turmoil of a man haunted by his own losses, and yet buoyed by the quiet defiance that Clara's cause had ignited in him. The minutes passed slowly as the trio sat in the oppressive stillness of the canyon. Outside, the night breathed with life. Distant coyote howls, the rustle of desert wind slipping through crevices, and the persistent drum of an unseen danger. Then, as if on cue, a sudden rustling sound broke the silence, a deliberate scraping like metal on stone. The sound sliced through the tension in their hidden niche, drawing every anxious eye upward. Wyatt's expression turned grim as he strained his gaze into the darkness beyond their shelter. "They've set a trap," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I suspect one of the bounty hunter's cohorts has rigged a makeshift alarm, a discarded tin cup, perhaps clinking on a rock to signal their approach." The revelation sent a shiver coursing through them. To be betrayed by a trap laid by one's own pursuers was a harbinger of a far deadlier ambush. In the flickering half-light, Garrett rose slowly, every motion measured and deliberate. "Now isn't the time for half measures," he said, the quiet authority in his tone brooking no argument. "We need to move quietly and find a better place to ride." His eyes, dark and resolute, flickered with the remnants of his hardened solitude, yet now they shone with renewed pledge to shield Clara from the ever-encroaching danger. Clara, tightly clutching the locket she kept hidden beneath her shawl, a small keepsake gifted to her by a long-forgotten kin, looked up at Garrett, her gaze laden with unsaid fears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and then, in a moment of profound vulnerability, added, "I fear that every step I take puts you in more harm's way." Her words trembled in the hush of the canyon, echoing off the ancient stone as if begging forgiveness from the wind itself. Garrett's stern features softened as he knelt beside her, taking her hand in his callous grasp. "Clara," he said gently, "don't carry the weight of my past with you. I chose this path, our path, because it was right. We must trust each other, even as the night conspires to tear us apart. His voice, steeped in both regret and determination, bridged the gap between two wounded souls forging an unlikely unity in the face of relentless injustice. Before any further plans could be made, the ground suddenly trembled, a subtle but insistent vibration that rippled through the rocky floor beneath them. The sound was almost imperceptible at first, a distant rumble that grew steadily into the unmistakable cadence of an approaching force. Wyatt's eyes snapped wide in alarm, and he quickly pointed toward the crevice's narrow mouth. A dark silhouette loomed there, indistinct yet undeniably present. A low, menacing whisper of voices drifted into their hidden refuge. It was then that the trap was sprung. A volley of sharp, commanding shouts cut through the midnight air. "There!" barked a voice, heavy with authority and venom, a bounty hunter's cry that set the very air aflame with threat. In that heart-stopping moment, chaos erupted. From the darkness emerged several figures, their guns glinting in the weak light, faces masked by grim determination and unyielding resolve to capture those who defied the law. The ambush was sudden, a calculated move by a crew loyal to the corrupt sheriff who demanded retribution for Clara's defiant acts. Garrett scrambled to his feet, pushing the makeshift camp aside as he instinctively drew his revolver. "Move!" he commanded, his voice echoing with raw urgency. Clara, her eyes wide with terror, clutched tightly to Garrett's arm. Wyatt, torn between duty and his own hesitations, hesitated a heartbeat too long before following suit. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to slow, the air thick with the scent of fear and hot lead. The clamor of the bounty hunters filled the valley, and every heartbeat pounded like a drum of war in their chests. As shadows danced wildly across the rocky walls, Garrett and Clara exchanged a brief, charged glance, a silent vow that no force, however corrupt or powerful, would drive them apart. In the ensuing scramble, Wyatt's loyalty hung uncertainly in the balance. He fumbled near the edge of their concealment, his eyes darting nervously between the advancing posse and the two fugitives he had vowed to aid. A single gunshot split the night, a sharp report that sent splinters of fear crashing through the tense atmosphere. Then, in the midst of the ambush's chaos, a flash of movement, a bounty hunter lunging forward with wild eyes and trembling hands, forced Garrett to react. With a swift motion honed by years of survival under harsh, uncompromising skies, he fired, and the sound of shattering resolve mingled with the ensuing cries of alarm. Dust exploded into the cool air as bodies stumbled, the brutal ballad of the frontier leitmotif for which many had paid dearly. But the ambush was far from over. As the beleaguered fugitives scrambled toward the rugged highlands in search of shelter, a sudden cry from Wyatt halted them. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice thick with mix of fear and something akin to remorse. In that split second, as the swirling mud and dust obscured friend from foe, Wyatt's expression shifted, a troubled, anguished look that spoke volumes of secrets yet untold. A mysterious figure, cloaked in shadow and the remnants of a tattered duster, stepped forward from behind a large boulder near the narrow mountain pass. The stranger's voice, low and resonant, carried a warning that cut through the tumult like a silver knife. You run from the law, but remember, when you defy injustice, you make enemies in the very hearts of those sworn to uphold it. As Wyatt's eyes met the stranger for a heartbeat charge of inscrutable meaning, Garrett realized that this ambush was only one battleground in a far larger war, a war waged not just on these harsh lands, but in the depths of society's corrupted soul. In that climactic moment, with the distant sound of pursuit and precarious hope pressed against their chests, Garrett, Clara, and Wyatt found themselves at a crossroads. The rugged highlands beckoned with the promise of an elusive refuge, a hollow cave within an abandoned shack that might shelter them from the raging storm of man and nature alike. Yet as they prepared to make a break for that sanctuary, a sharp, insistent whisper of betrayal rippled through their midst, a hint that even one among them might be compromised. Wyatt's eyes flickered once more, darkened with a secret he dared not reveal fully. With the night raging in an unholy symphony of gunfire, echoing curses, and the relentless drip of impending doom, The trio gathered their dwindling resolve. As they made their desperate charge toward the hidden refuge in the highlands, the ominous figure's words echoed in their ears, a portent that the true battle, one that would test the very essence of trust and redemption, was only just beginning. And just as the first steps toward the shelter were taken, a final, bone-chilling blast of gunfire erupted from the darkness behind them, leaving all within that battered canyon to wonder, was Wyatt truly on their side, or had the seeds of betrayal already been sown in the barren, unforgiving soil of the Montana Badlands? At the break of a bruised dawn, when the sky played hues of amber and pale lilac over the rugged Montana highlands, the final crescendo of their desperate flight echoed in the cold air. The ambush that had shattered the uneasy peace of the previous night now found its resolution. In the lean moments after a series of sharp gunshots had rent the darkness, Wyatt, with eyes that shimmered with fierce determination, rushed to the forefront of their escape. His movement was fluid and unhesitating, silencing the lingering doubts that had haunted Garrett and Clara since the betrayal hinted at in the chaos. "Get up!" Wyatt barked, his voice clear as a clarion call through the early mist. In that instant, he flanked Garrett, drawing his sidearm and covering the rear as the trio bolted from the rocky hideaway. The sound of pursuit, a cacophony of shouted orders and the pounding of hooves, reverberated behind them. Yet, in the bitter air of possibility and peril, Wyatt's loyalty was now unmistakable. His earlier ambiguity had dissolved into focused action. He had chosen to stand by the fugitives rather than abet their capture. Garrett, his heart still pounding from the chaos, led the charge along a narrow, crumbling path that cut across a windswept ridge. Every step was a contest against time and treachery. The cool dust swirled around their worn boots as the trio pressed forward, seeking refuge in the cavernous embrace of a long-forgotten cave nestled beneath a fractured, pine-battered ledge. Shadows danced on the rugged walls, and every breath felt heavy with the echo of past loss and tentative hope. Inside the cave, dim light filtered through natural fissures. Clara, leaning against a smooth stone wall, cradled a small locket close to her heart, a precious keepsake that testified to the cause for which she risked everything. In that vulnerable moment, as the tremors of the ambush still vibrated in the night air outside, her eyes met Garrett's steady gaze. With a trembling voice soft as a midnight prayer, she whispered, "I never imagined that defiance could bind two souls together as it has with us." Garrett's rough fingers brushed against hers in silent reassurance. "Out here, beyond the reach of a crooked law, we're free to choose our own destiny," he said, his voice echoing low and resolute in the natural amphitheater of stone. "I lost so much to injustice, but now I reckon I found something worth fighting for." The words, simple and steeped in the melancholy of a lifetime spent in solitude, kindled a light in the cavern that even this place of refuge could not obscure. As the trio settled into the cavern's recesses, Wyatt emerged from a side passage carrying a battered tin lantern. Its weak glow revealed faint carvings on the stone, old symbols of protection, and warning left behind by those who'd once roamed these lands. Wyatt's eyes softened as he studied the markings, murmuring with note of reverence, "These markings, they speak of a promise that those who dare defy tyranny may one day spark rebirth on these barren plains." Before the quiet could envelope them once more, a distant clamor stirred outside, a raucous sound of metal striking stone, followed by a guttural shout. The bounty hunters had not yet been vanquished. They lingered on the edge of the highlands, hungry for retribution. The reverberation of hooves and the clatter of weapons outside underscored that the confrontation was not truly over. Yet, as the first warm blush of sunrise crept along the horizon, a new figure appeared at the mouth of the cave. A man emerged, silhouetted against the soft glow of dawn, his presence unexpected and enigmatic. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that obscured much of his weathered face, and carried a quiet dignity that belied the roughness of his attire. His hands were steadied on the handle of a well-used rifle, and his eyes, sharp and discerning, swept across the gathered fugitives with an intensity that suggested deep, unspoken knowledge. "Easy now," the stranger intoned, his voice low and measured, carrying the gravity of someone who had seen too many hard winters. I've been tracking these men ever since I heard whispers of this injustice. His tone was neither entirely sympathetic nor overtly hostile. It was a measured neutrality of a man who had once strayed close to the edge of lawlessness himself and had since chosen redemption. If you're headed for freedom, I can help, but be warned. Where you walk, you stir up old pains, and the crooked hearts of the mighty will not forget easily. Clara's eyes widened as the stranger's words sank in. Here was a man not dispatched by corruption, but forged in the same struggles that had driven her into exile. Garrett's gaze met the stranger's with cautious gratitude, and Wyatt nodded slowly in acknowledgement of a familiar purpose. The stranger, who introduced himself simply as Silas, had a presence that promised both aid and the reminder that every choice came with its own cost. In the ensuing hush that followed his proclamation, Silas delineated a plan in soft, determined tones. "There's a valley up ahead," he explained, "a hidden expanse where the outcasts and the brave are gathered. It's a place where free hearts can build a community, a haven against the tyranny that shackles our land." His words were like a rallying cry, a vision of hope painted in the vibrant colors of a dream slowly taking form amid the bleakness of injustice. Garrett's heart, long scarred by loss, kindled with a cautious optimism. "Lead us there," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of his hard-earned resolve. Clara, emboldened by the promise of a future where her cause could flourish, nodded in silent affirmation. Even Wyatt, his earlier doubts now seemingly washed away by duty and redemption, offered a curt, supportive smile. But as they began their deliberate march out of the cavern, the sound of the bounty hunters' pursuit surged from beyond the rocky outcrop, a final, desperate attempt to snatch back what they viewed as their rightful prize. The pursuers' shouts, intermingled with the piercing cracks of gunfire, carved jagged patterns in the early light. All around them, the Montana highlands bore the imprints of a relentless chase. In the frenetic moments that followed, a climactic confrontation unfurled. Amid a narrow pass where the rising sun painted the ridges gold, Garrett, Clara, Wyatt, and their newfound ally Silas took their stand. As the bounty hunters emerged from the swirling dust, their faces etched with fanatical determination, the fugitives held their ground. The air shuddered with the tension of a battle not solely of weapons, but of ideals. The defiant love between two souls and the burgeoning hope for a free tomorrow. Gunshots rang out, echoing off the stone cliffs as shadows danced across the sagebrush plains. In the midst of the chaos, Garrett locked eyes with Clara. In that silent exchange, they shared all that led them here: the despair of lost kin, the bitter taste of unjust laws, and the promise that love could ignite even the coldest heart. Clara's grip tightened on the locket against her chest, a symbol of her unwavering dedication to the downtrodden, while Garrett's steadfast expression declared that no force of corruption would ever quench the spark of rebellion in his soul. With Silas's guidance and Wyatt's steadfast cover, the foursome executed a risky maneuver. They drew the bounty hunters into a narrow chasm where the treacherous terrain favored the erratic movements of those who knew its secrets. Every shot, every shout, and every heartbeat echoed with the promise of deliverance. Slowly but surely, the tide turned. The bounty hunters, overwhelmed by the combined firepower and resourcefulness of the fugitives, began to falter. In a final surge of valor and desperation, one of the bounty hunters collapsed under a barrage of precise shots, his fall marking the beginning of the end for their captors. As the assailants retreated into the waking vastness of the highlands, silence fell like a benediction upon the battered group. The remaining enemy forces, their numbers diminished and their morale shaken, melted away into the distant dust. In that triumphant yet bittersweet moment, the fugitives found themselves standing on the threshold of a new beginning, a hidden valley promised by Silas, where the outcasts could forge a legacy of hope, justice, and love. Exhausted yet exhilarated, Garrett and Clara followed Silas along a rugged trail that eventually opened into a verdant, secluded valley. Here, among the whispering grasses and the gentle murmur of a clear mountain creek, a small community had begun to take shape, made up of those who had dared to defy the shackles of a corrupt order. In the soft light of dawn, as the valley bathed in hues of tender gold and gentle rose, Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears of both relief and resolve. Wyatt, standing a little apart from the others, watched the scene with a conflicted expression. The trials of the night had etched deeply into his soul, and his loyalty, once shrouded in ambiguity, now lay bare as he stepped forward to kneel before Clara. "I owe you more than my silence and shadow, Clara," he confessed softly, his voice heavy with regret and sincerity. "I was torn by my own past, but now I choose to stand with you and with all those who fight for what is right." His words, achingly sincere, sealed the fragile bonds of trust that had formed among them. Garrett, ever watchful and protective, placed a reassuring hand on Wyatt's shoulder. "We're all part of this now," he declared, his tone mingling pride and tender resolve. "In this valley, our legacy will be built, not on the broken bones of the past, but on the hope that burns within each of us." For a long moment, the gathered souls, fugitives, reformed outlaws, and weary travelers alike, stood together in the awakening light. The valley, though still fragile in its beginnings, shimmered with the promise of new order, one where love, resilience, and defiance of unjust laws would forge a future beyond the borders of the old world. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky with a hopeful radiance, Garrett and Clara shared a final, lingering glance, a silent vow that their bond and the cause she so fervently championed would endure the trials ahead. Their hands remained intertwined, a promise that, while the path would be fraught with challenges and the tyranny of the past might leave its scars, their love and determination would light the way toward redemption and rebirth. Yet even in this moment of hard-won tranquility, the distant sound of hoofbeats and a whispered threat on the wind reminded them that the world beyond the valley was still fraught with danger. A final, almost imperceptible ripple in the air hinted at new challenges, whispers that the corrupt powers would not relinquish their grip without a final, desperate act. Still, for now, the valley stood as a testament to the unyielding human spirit, a legacy born of heartbreak and bolstered by hope. And as the fugitives began laying the foundations of community that would shelter the marginalized, the soft murmur of a creek and the rustle of sagebrush trees bore witness to a gentle anthem of renewal. In the fading glow of the morning, as the valley filled with the promise of life beyond tyranny, Garrett, Clara, and their steadfast companions prepared to embrace the future. Their hearts remained wary of the advancing shadows of injustice, yet they were buoyed by the certainty that love and truth, like the resilient land itself, could endure. And so, beneath the sky now ablaze with the resplendent colors of dawn, the three, bound by experience, sacrifice, and an unbreakable will, stepped forward into a future undefined. The hope they kindled in that hidden valley would echo for generations, a legacy of love that defied borders, healed past wounds, and dared to challenge the corrosive power of unjust laws. Even as the distant, echoing sounds of the old world faded into a muted promise of future trials, one truth remained. The story of love and defiance in the cold expanse of the Montana Badlands was just beginning. For every sunrise held the possibility of new challenges, and with it, the iridescent promise of hope that would forever shape the frontier.